This is the Heroic Voice, where I talk to comic book creators, people I've worked with, other interesting people about the history of comics, superheroes, and the current state of the comic book industry. I also discuss current and upcoming projects, current events, and any other topics my guests might be interested in talking about. So subscribe and hit the like button. Help me grow this channel and promote indie comic book creators, publishers, and other people affiliated with the comic book industry. Your comments are appreciated. Get to it and leave feedback, good, bad, and otherwise. I am your host, Dennis Maloney, writer, publisher of the Heroic Multiverse, where we spotlight good girls, bad girls, super babes, and superheroics in a classic, kind of golden agey style. Grab some snacks and enjoy. This is the Heroic Voice. Hi, we're here on the Heroic Voice with Darin Henry. We're doing an extra one this week because Darin has a Kickstarter going, and we want to get that out there because I think it's a worthy project. We want to get people interested in it and see if we can reach his fundraising goal before the March 1st deadline. I think it goes through March 1st, right? It ends
Yeah,
after.
it ends during the day on March 1st.
All righty. So, Darin, let's start by talking about you, right? I know you're a screenwriter specializing in comedies. Um, how did you get into, well, talk about that, then talk about how that shifted into, comic book kind of stuff for you.
Well,
Not
I
that it's
mean,
actually shifted, it's just
yeah,
something
it's
else you
all
do.
sort of part of who I am. I mean, a lot of the things that sort of influence how I've become a writer professionally were obviously, built around the things that I was into when I was younger, and that was comic books and comedy, and it's been, sort of a whole career taking different things that I've learned from each of those, and uh, the comedy that I was into was British comedy, particularly. That was a big part of what I was really fond of in my teenage years. But even before I was into comedy, I was, a big comic book guy, and I loved comics up until about, I was maybe 13, 14 when I stopped reading them as avidly as I did when I was really young. But the superhero books were always just the thing I was really into, and Marvel was specifically the publisher whose works that they were just always my favorites. And the people who were making books at that time were people I'd start to look at the credits and recognize some of my favorites like Roger Stern and David Michelinie and Tom DeFalco. And just the fact that those writers were making some really consistently entertaining comics, lots of action and good character work, and just made me a big fan of comic books. And so yeah, the comics, and then about the same time I was sort of losing as much of my love for the comics. They were starting to change into something a bit more cerebral, and the Dark Knight stuff started in what, 86. So I was, getting a little the things that were being done to keep me around were the things that were pushing me away. The more mature, the more, postmodern type of comic books, and the comedy I was into, the British stuff was really engaging me a lot more. So I was sort of pursuing that interest a lot more.
Well, how did you get into screenwriting? Do you remember what your first job was in that area?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I went to college at Temple University in Philadelphia, near where I grew up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and the British stuff was still consistently entertaining me. And the program director of the TV station in Harrisburg, the public TV station, the guy who'd been buying all these British shows, I arranged to meet him in my senior year to do a humanities project on the British comedies that I was a fan of, and I interviewed him, and that relationship sort of grew from there. I became a volunteer at the station, worked as a telemarketer, and then finally I went to England during my junior year of college, and met all the British comedy people who I was a fan of, like the people making Red Dwarf, which was a sci-fi comedy, The Young Ones, which was a sort of edgy comedy at the time in the 80s, and Blackadder, another show
Ooh,
that I was a
Blackadder.
big
Oh
fan of.
goodness.
So,
Yeah.
those were the influences I had up until then. And I sort of spent my semester abroad and learned a whole lot about me, what people make comedy. The kind of people that make it weren't as funny in person as their writing was. So I was sort of like, well, if I'm not a funny person to talk to, I can at least write funny. And that inspired me to start writing as a comedy, pursuing an interest in writing comedy. And I took a semester off to make money after getting back from London, and worked at the same TV station in the same programming department with that gentleman, Tom Keck, who had been, you know, the programmer who I really enjoyed his programming choices. So I got to work with him, finished up at Temple, did my senior year, moved to Los Angeles, and I was getting ready to leave when I was in a conversation with someone else at the TV station who mentioned a few people who had come through Harrisburg when they were younger, and they then turned into Hollywood writers, and one of whom was the creator of Home Improvement, which at that time had just started and was like a massive breakout success.
Hmm.
But I wasn't a huge fan of it. So I was like, oh, that's great. Someone from this area is that involved in such a big success. And then he also mentioned that Tom Sharonis was out in LA. And I was like, wait a minute, Tom Sharonis, that's the director of the Seinfeld show. And he was like, what's Seinfeld? At that time, no one really was watching it. This was like 91, 90, beginning of 92. And I said, if I could meet that person, because, as I said, when I met those British writers, I started to think maybe I could write too. And the show that I really gravitated toward was Seinfeld. So I started writing specs in college. So I had 4 spec Seinfelds written in my senior year, and then I had done that and met this person who told me about Tom Sharonis. So it felt like everything I had done up until that point had come together in that moment, and all the British stuff and all the entertainment I'd done with the public television, and all my desires to work in Hollywood all sort of met at that one focal point. And it did turn out that he was able to get in touch with the Tom Sharonis, and Tom gave me an opportunity after, moving out to LA. It was a weird time too. It was August when most shows were already staffed, but turned out someone had left right at the time I had gotten there, and they needed someone part-time to answer the phones 2 days a week every day after a show got made. So, and I just parlayed that into working on Seinfeld more and more. They were making more and more complicated episodes, like episodes that were taking place in multiple airports and in movie theaters, multiple movie theaters. So they needed someone to be on hand, and a PA at 22 years old, I was that person. And so I was on Seinfeld throughout that 4th season, pretty much maybe 6 or 7 shows in. And then I also filled in as a writer's assistant. Again, another job that if I weren't already working there, I probably wouldn't have been considered, but I had been involved in the show in a different capacity, and they liked me. Larry and Jerry enjoyed having me around enough. And when another pair of writers came in needing a writer's assistant, they asked me if I would take that job. And I, of course, jumped at it because writer's assistant beats production assistant, especially when I wasn't that great a production assistant. But I think I did a good job as a writer's assistant, and I spent about 2.5 years working with Larry and Jerry full time.
Okay. Um,
And then I got a job opportunity writing for the Muppets, which was a show I watched as a kid, but the ABC revival was a similar format. And that was my first staff job. After 3 months of interviews and meetings and things, I got that job. And uh, during that time, I started writing freelance Seinfeld episodes, and it all just sort of
good job.
went in that direction. Yeah. And then I ended up living in London and writing for the BBC for 3 years throughout different points of my career. So I got that dream sort of taken off too. I did a lot of fun things over there. So good times.
So, talk about comics, right? You never
Yes,
lost your
sir.
love for comics. When did you decide that you really wanted to do them?
Well, my kids were born, my oldest is 18 now, my daughter's 15, but about 10, 15 years ago, I was really thinking how comics sort of shaped what my childhood was. And when I would read the kids' comics, the new stuff that I was reading to them never really clicked. But I have a very large library of comics. Uh, that I got not just as a kid, but when I started writing TV and I had more disposable income, let's say. And it was before the movies became so big that, the comic values weren't that extreme as they might be now for some of those Silver Age books. But I was reading the kids these older books and they were really connecting with them and they really enjoyed them, especially the stuff in the 70s and 80s, which is my childhood stuff. I don't know whether I was reading to them in a different energy or something, but whatever it was, that it seemed like it was on the page as much as it was in my voice. And I just felt frustrated that the new comics didn't really do the things that those old comics did. And I thought, I've been living dreams my whole life basically, and I want to live this one of making comics. So I started publishing. This was the first one I did. I hired Sal Buscema and Ron Frenz as the artists. Sal did a really great job on sort of drawing some covers for me, but he was not full-time penciling anymore. And I was a big Ron Frenz fan throughout my childhood. I mean, he was sort of getting his bigger jobs as I was losing interest in the medium, so to speak. But I certainly read all of his Amazing Spider-Man books, and Tom DeFalco was writing those, and he was a great writer to me. So I got those guys on board and sold them on what I was doing. And I hired another guy named Jeff Schultz, who was doing Betty and Veronica, to do a more of a comedic voice book, more like my company's sitcomics, because the sitcom is sort of how I got my start.
Of course.
And, The Blue Baron it's a very traditional superhero book, but it's also about a teenager who's going on a field trip and there's an explosion that causes him and this superhero to have a instant and permanent body swap. So it's like a Freaky Friday premise. So there's inherent comedy, and the Marvel comics don't have an inherently comedic premise, but they make these movies that are the humor is a big trademark of their films. But I always feel like they're forcing a bit of the humor because there's nothing inherently funny about the concepts of those movies. Whereas I try to make the humor sort of just a layer of what I'm doing, and I can come up with. I mean, the premise is funny, but I can come up with superhero adventures that serve both that premise and also just the traditional superhero storytelling.
Yeah. The superhero genre. Well, superheroes are over the top to begin with, so I can certainly
Exactly.
understand, why humor is there. The trouble with a lot of the Marvel stuff is that it's forced, right? And that doesn't work. You can't force humor. It has to flow naturally. That was one of, as I told you earlier before we started this, Flair was meant to have situational humor.
Mhm.
And I think we did a pretty good job, still do a pretty good job of pulling that off because there the humor is not forced. It flows naturally. The underlying stuff is very serious. But there are situations that will arise if you're a superhero that are a little bit cockeyed, right?
Right, of course.
And that's where you go with it. Um, you are doing a Kickstarter now
Yep.
because of the issues with Diamond, right? You want to talk a little bit about your experiences with Diamond before we get into the Kickstarter project itself?
Well, I personally have had nothing but great experiences with Diamond. Um, they've been amazing, frankly. I just haven't had the financial concerns that other publishers have had with them. It take time between when I publish books, and it just happens that nothing I've put out in the time that they were having their financial problems. Everything I've published and distributed through them, I've been paid completely by them very promptly. And they've been amazing. I actually did self-publish and self-distribute for the first few books that I did because I wasn't feeling like I needed to learn a bit more about that side of the business before asking someone else to do it for me. I wanted to call the stores and see if they would be interested. And I had some decent success, putting out the books and contacting retailers and actually getting them to order from me. But it was a lot of work and you miss a lot of possible sales, and distribution internationally is just still impossible as a self-publisher. So when I got in touch, or someone at Diamond was aware of what I was doing and reached out and let me know about what they could do for me. And I said when I get the right book, I'm going to definitely be reaching out to try to get distribution. And I put out a book a few years ago that was that book. It's The Heroes Union.
Hmm.
And that was the first issue we did, that we were the first one to get distributed. Roger Stern, I brought on board. We co-plotted it, and he scripted this story. And Ron Friends did the cover with Brett Breeding, and Ron and Sal did the artwork inside with a guy named Chris Nye helping out with Sal for the inking. And Sal actually won a Ringo Award for this book in for a few years ago. And it got a lot of orders. Over 5,000 copies were
That's very
ordered,
good
which
these days. Yeah.
for something that nobody knew about, it was a pretty good result, and I was very, very pleased with that. So the fast forwarding to the news that Diamond was going through bankruptcy. I had just sent Diamond the second issue of Heroes Union, and I brought David Michelinie on board, again, a great writer from that heyday of Marvel that I was a fan of as a kid. And he's done an amazing job with this new story. And it was again going to be laid out by Ron Friends with Chris Nye, who, as I said, inked the first issue, taking on more of the penciling and inking as well, with covers by Ron, with inks by Sal Buscema and Brett Breeding. So it felt like the right package to send out and get back into the stores with the new story. And then a week after I'd sent the submission information in, the word broke that Diamond was bankrupt, and it was obviously really bad news for so many publishers. Obviously, I just enjoyed working with Diamond because they've always been really receptive to the kind of comics I was making, and the people there are just great. I really do think it's a sad thing that they're not likely to survive this the way they had been. And I also feel like their biggest crime was, in my experience, was the fact that they were concerned about people's health and shut down. And obviously, that opened them up to having publishers say, "We don't do business like that. We can't continue with you." So, it's tough for everybody that is losing money or who's got who's feeling the financial pain of this. And I certainly was nervous about trying to pay for whatever printing I was going to do for this new book. And that meant, not knowing if I was going to get paid by Diamond. You just don't know. These things are too uncertain. And so to take care of that uncertainty, I tried to put the book up as a variant edition that would be kickstarted, and I probably aimed way too high, as my funding goal is almost certainly not going to be met. But
Hey, hey,
I
hey,
felt,
hey, don't give up yet.
yes, of course, I'm not in that category, but I do feel like it's tough because I really consciously decided not to do things like original art and things where you might get 200, 300, 400, $500 in one backer, because I felt like that I wanted to get the people who were reading the books to see how many I could inspire to buy them just directly from me. And that unfortunately has not been as high a number as I had hoped, because I
Not
have
yet.
not yet, not yet. And I every time I don't get email lists filled with people who just pass my table. If someone makes a purchase, I say, "Would you like to be on the email list?" And they usually generally say, "Okay." And that's the audience who I'd sent emails to. And I had, a lot of people opening, a lot of people clicking, but not a lot of people backing yet. Hopefully that will change. But it's just again, I'm not writing this one. I mean, I co-plotted a little bit of it, but David Michelinie and Ron Friends are doing the bulk of the stuff. So I mean, you're getting two of the people who I'm sure wrote a lot of comics that people watching this and people who read about this project either have on their own collections or they have on the walls of their stores near them that are worth many times what they were sold for originally. So these guys are really,
They're
they're
very
pros.
talented. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I should ask you. I haven't spoken to Roger Stern in a long time. How is Sterno doing? How long has it been?
He's doing as well as can be expected. I mean, he's writing books more now, so he's got that happening. And yeah, he's writing the fourth issue of Blue Baron for me, but we're waiting for a few more pages of art to come in before he can finish writing that first of the three. Because the books are called binge books, and that's more, you binge things now in television and other entertainment, but it's also a reminder to people who buy the books that they can get a full, complete, self-contained story, a 68-page package for a single price of, the price of these new books is like maybe two single issues. You're getting three for the price of two, basically.
That's cool. All
And
right.
Roger's work is outstanding, and I'm sure he's excited to get his teeth into this next Blue Baron, and I'm excited to see what he does with it.
Okay, let's talk about the Kickstarter. You said there's not a lot on there. You can always add stuff, right? You can go in
Yeah,
and
I guess I just feel like I mean I think another thing that might be inhibiting people from backing is that it is still, at least at the point where we're having this conversation, it should still be in the previews catalog next at the end of this month and throughout next month. So I think people who
might,
are
yeah.
comfortable buying through their shops or shops that are more comfortable buying through um, Diamond will probably, hopefully, make that option theirs. And the only thing that's different about what I'm putting on the Kickstarter is that it will have a number two, whereas the book that's coming out through Diamond is going to be the Heroes Union, subtitled "The Witch and the Warriors" number one. Um,
Okay, so basically kind of a variant cover on the
yeah,
Kickstarter.
exactly. The covering, I mean, the numbering is the difference, basically. I
Hmm.
mean, that's the thing, and I think that might be another might be
Well, what you're
inhibiting.
getting then would be essentially a Kickstarter exclusive if you
Yeah,
bought the book
exactly. It
through
will say
Kickstarter.
number two. It would say number two instead of number one because
Okay.
it's not, it's the second Heroes Union story, but in the previews we're prioritizing what retailers want, which is something that'll more easily sell itself off the shelf if they don't want to have to hand sell every book they get through the door.
Well, what other rewards are you offering for this Kickstarter for Heroes Union?
Well, I've got lots of signed books, things that have been signed, previous releases that we've done, which have been signed by guys like Sal Buscema, who's 90 years old and still doing inking work for me. And, you know, Ron Friends signed it, Brett Breeding signed them, the ones that they did. Craig Rousseau, Stephen Gordon, who did the artwork for another book called The Headhunter. And I just that's basically the rewards that you get. You get three different versions with three different covers that all say Heroes Union number two, and those covers are really dynamic and fun in the classic Marvel style, where you have dialogue on the cover, and it actually features a scene that's reflective of what's inside the actual story, as opposed to some pose or some
All right.
non-specific stuff.
That
So.
leads right in the next question. What's inside? What's the story? Why should people be interested in the Heroes Union?
Well, it's a character called Professor Wrath, who had been a big part of this story that I published called Blue Baron number three. He is in that story, we revealed that there's a character named Wonder Witch who's been in this place called the Dimension for over 150 years. She's been sort of staying there to as a way to stay out of to keep another character called Scourge out of our universe. So she's had made a deal. She was sent this to this place, the Dimension, and she's been trapped there for over 150 years. And now this character, Professor Wrath, is living there, and it's obviously nightmarish, demons everywhere. The Blue Baron goes there. She saves him from the dangers that he encounters, and he promises to come back and help her. And that's how we start this Heroes Union story, with the Blue Baron recruiting the rest of the Heroes Union to go into this place and rescue her. And that's how the first chapter unfolds. They have a confrontation with this Professor Wrath character. They release her from the Dimension. Unfortunately, by doing that, they also release this character Scourge,
Yep.
who also has to be stopped, and he's as evil as any of them. And the backstory is that he was also a villain in the 1850s, where that Wonder Witch had been living, and so they have to figure out a way to deal with her. And then, lo and behold, once they knock that threat out, the final boss, this character named Janicide, who David Michelinie devised. He comes out of the dimension too, and he's looking to get revenge and to conquer all of humanity in a way that only the Heroes Union have any hope of stopping him.
Only the Heroes Union can stop him.
That's right.
Right.
So
That's
yeah, the team.
just as an aside, that is basically the same core plot as our Liberty Girl character. Just so two great minds working in the
There you
same.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. But it's essentially 3 chapter story.
And this is two.
David, what's that? Yeah.
This is chapter two, right?
This is the second issue of Heroes Union, but it's 60 pages.
Oh,
So each of
I
those
see.
three 20-page chapters sees them take on a different threat. So you
Gotcha.
Professor Wrath, Scourge, Professor Wrath in chapter 1, chapter 2 is Scourge, and chapter 3 is Genocide. And obviously, that gives you three
Three
good,
books for the price of two.
exactly, exactly. So, hopefully those of people out there who hear about this are inspired to, go to the Kickstarter and try backing it.
We'll do what we can for that.
Yes, sir.
I looked at it. I thought it was a worthy project. I tossed in a little bit of money.
Yeah,
I would
thank you very
encourage
much.
everybody to do so. It's
I
let's
appreciate
get
it.
this work out there.
Yes,
David's a wonderful
exactly.
writer. Sal is still kicking after all these years.
He's fantastic. I
Ron
just love
Prince is,
talking to the
yeah.
guy.
Okay.
Yeah,
Anything that you would like to add here before we
yeah.
wrap this
I
up?
mean, just from a personal level, I would love to have this book meet its funding goal, and if it does, that would be wonderful. It would certainly make it more fun for folks who like getting an exclusive version to get it. Obviously, if we don't meet the goal, I'll be disappointed. But as you know, there's a lot of things that are a lot worse than not meeting a funding goal that are happening in here in Southern California. So I just feel, fortunate that I'm able to make the comics the way I want to, and I hope that those who do back it get to see that goal reached. And if we don't meet the goal, the book will still be in the previews catalog. As it stands now, it looks like it's going to be in the March previews under Binge Books. And hopefully, if they haven't got the chance because we don't meet the goal, people will still call their local shop and place an order and make that happen. So,
So what we want people to do is we want people to go to Kickstarter,
mhm.
search for Heroes Union,
Heroes Union #2,
number
exactly.
two, and you will find it. It comes up right there. Okay. So
Yeah.
Darren,
And one other thing, I've been lucky enough working with an artist named Jane Walker, and we were able to sell a 2-book deal to a publisher named Andrews McMeel for a graphic novel series for middle grade kids graphic novels called Doom and Gloom. That's the characters, and I'm excited about that. That's what I've been working on for a while. While the TV irons have cooled a little bit. I've got a couple books coming out probably in 2026 for that the first one of the 2 books that we're working on. So that'll be a lot of fun.
well, Darren, that sounds great. Thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure. We need to do this again sometime when that 2026 project is underway.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. Thank you so much, Dennis. Really appreciate being part of your podcast, your video. What is it
What is
called?
this? It's a YouTube video. Heroic Voice.
Your YouTube channel. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, you too.